This is the iPhone 11 Pro Max. When Apple announced this phone about 3 months ago, everyone seemed pretty underwhelmed. Obviously, that hasn't been the case once everyone got their hands on one, but now that the honeymoon phase has passed, is it still worth upgrading to, or should you wait for the redesign next year? My name is Ben, and today we're going to find out just that. Before we get going though, if you guys really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up as it'll help with the YouTube algorithm, and comment down below what you'd like to see in future videos. There will also be timestamps down below on whatever part you want to skip to in case you're looking for a particular part. Other than that, let's get going. Starting with the build and design, you either love it, hate it, or are bored with it at this point because, let's be honest, nothing's really changed. You have the same old notch from the iPhones of yesteryear, and the triple camera setup that looked ridiculous on leaks and during the keynote. But to be honest, it doesn't really bother me at all like it does to some other folks. The frosted matte finish with the glossy camera cutout I think is such a nice refresh that I constantly take my phone out just to look at it. Personally, I think it looks better than any iPhone with the exception of the iPhone 5 and 5S of course, and I think it'll age much better than its similar looking older siblings, which I think personally look pretty outdated now. Do I think it's the best looking phone in the world? No. But even with its old and refined design, it definitely gives it a new life. Design is subjective though, and not everyone will feel the same way I do. But what isn't subjective is how good the build quality is. When you hold this phone or even just look at it, you really get the feeling that this isn't just any phone. Stainless steel, thick glass, matte finish, these are the things that give the iPhone 11 Pro series its high quality look and feel, making this one of the best built phones of this decade. Design aside, the display is great. Apple touted it as being the best display on any smartphone, and I have no clue if that's actually true because I've been using iPhones for the past 4 years. Regardless, it's a pretty damn impressive display. Colors and viewing angles are as great as ever, and it's sharp. But now, the sustained brightness is 800 nits compared to the iPhone X's 600 nits sustained brightness. And those extra 200 nits are noticeable when you're outside on a bright sunny day, which is when you need a brighter screen the most. So no complaints there. Now combine the display with the speakers and you have a media consumption beast. The speakers on the iPhone 11 Pros are pretty great. Apple has always had awesome speakers, but they take it a step further with this year's iPhone with Dolby Atmos support. Real quick, if you don't already know what Dolby Atmos is, basically instead of pushing sound to a particular speaker like with a 5.1 or 7.1 channel surround sound system, Dolby Atmos pushes sound into a particular spot in 3D space around you, sometimes by more than one speaker. It'll only work with content you're consuming that has Dolby Atmos support, and it works great, but to an extent. Let's not forget, this is a phone and not a dedicated sound system, so it's not going to be replacing your living room speakers anytime soon, but they definitely are the best speakers I've heard on any smartphone so far, and I don't mind skipping out on headphones if I have to. Speaking of Dolby Atmos, subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss my review on the Samsung Q70R soundbar, which has Dolby Atmos support. It is awesome. Next, we have to talk about 3D Touch because the iPhone community was pretty vocal when Apple announced that they'd be getting rid of 3D Touch in replacement of Haptic Touch. I was pretty bummed myself, and I still am. However, the Haptic Touch software is really good that I miss 3D Touch a lot less than I thought I would. The one area that I used 3D Touch the most was on the keyboard, where I was able to hard press on the screen, release a little bit of pressure, and push hard again to start highlighting. This made it super easy to navigate through text to edit words or cut complete sentences. Haptic Touch does support this function, but now I have to use 2 hands instead of just my thumb. So overall, it's not bad compared to 3D Touch, it's just not as fast, which applies to the rest of the functions. You're still able to do all of the functions you previously were able to do with 3D Touch, just slower since everything is now a long press rather than the amount of force you apply to the screen. However, getting rid of 3D Touch didn't come without its benefits because leaving it behind did make the display assembly thinner than before. The main benefits from its sacrifice is the battery life, and oh my god, let me just tell you how good the battery life in this phone is. It is insane! I still can't get over how good it is. Let me just give you an example. My daily routine is pretty, well, routine. I wake up at 9 a.m., leave work around 5 or 6 p.m., and when I had my iPhone X, I had to charge throughout the day, and I use my phone lightly. We're talking texting calls for 3 hours, if that, and it was already in need of a charge. Maximum capacity was at 85% before I sold it, so it's not like the battery was faulty, it just had really poor battery life. Then during the keynote, when Apple announced that the iPhone 11 Pro lineup would have 4 and 5 hours more battery life than the iPhone XS, I called bullshit. But here I am, never needing to carry a charger with me anymore, charging my phone maybe once every 2 days. To this day, I still think to myself, wow, the battery life is just so fantastic. It's safe to say it's by far my favorite thing about this phone, because I mean, come on, us iPhone users didn't know anything about good battery life until now. Next is Face ID. Apple says it's about 30% quicker than previous iterations of Face ID, and that sounds about right, but I don't think that came with hardware improvements. Instead, it seems like that was all software with iOS 13. More on iOS 13 later, by the way. Because my girlfriend's iPhone XR unlocks at about the same speed as my iPhone 11 Pro Max. Apple did also claim improvements on being able to find your face in more angles, but I've noticed absolutely zero difference in angle performance. It feels exactly the same as my iPhone X, but it did work just a tiny bit better when I'm laying sideways in my bed and part of my face is covered. I can't cover half my face still, but I can show less than what I previously was able to, so if you're a phone user in bed, you'll be happy with this. Another thing you'll be happy with is the cameras. Now, you should probably grab some popcorn for this part, because it's a long one. The cameras are among the best of any phone currently out in the market. The wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens are great, and with the implementation of Deep Fusion in iOS 13.2, it's doing some insane computational photography with the A13 Bionic Neural Engine, where it takes multiple pictures before and after you take a photo and stitches them all together so pictures are stupid sharp. And stupid sharp they are. The pictures you're looking at here is of our Airbnb in Atlanta with the best host I've ever had. Yes, I'm talking about the cat. Portrait mode works all right on animals, but you start to see its limitations when it tries to process all the edges of the cat's hair and trying to create a digital bokeh, making the edges look extremely soft and blend in with the background. This is less of an issue in areas where the phone doesn't have to try to create that digital bokeh like here and here. It works better on humans, but it's still nowhere near as good as optical options like the regular photo mode on the camera options or a DSLR or mirrorless camera. One thing I found myself using more than I thought I would is the ultra wide angle lens. I knew I would like it, but I didn't know I would use it as much as I do. The wide angle lens is fine if you have space to back up to get more in frame, but what if you don't have that extra space? Well, that's where the ultra wide comes in. This picture is of the Airbnb we stayed at, and it's a tiny house. Using the ultra wide lens made it possible to easily get the entire tiny house in frame without having to back up to get more in frame, which again, it's a tiny house, so there is no moving back. To give you some perspective, if we use a wide-angle lens instead of the ultra-wide, you'll get an image similar to this. Not good enough. So 2 thumbs up for the ultra-wide-angle lens. Next is the front-facing camera. This is the one area Apple really needed to work on from previous iPhones, and work on it they did. The front-facing picture quality is not only really good, but again, the wide-angle lens in the front saved the day where I was able to get everyone in frame with these pictures where I wasn't able to otherwise if I still had my iPhone X or if you still have one or a XS. When you're not using the ultra-wide-angle lens, night mode in this is awesome. There are absolutely zero issues with night photography. Long exposure shots are pretty sharp, and unlike DSLRs or mirrorless cameras where you need to use a tripod so you don't get a blurry long exposure image, that's not an issue here as long as you're not flailing your phone around. Now, I do have an issue with some of my images every once in a while when any light source hits my camera at a certain angle and it creates reflections of certain subjects within a shot. I can avoid it by just angling my phone slightly, but it is annoying. I don't know if it's because of the metal ring around the lens, if the glass is funky, or just a defect of my camera or anyone else's, but if you're also experiencing this, please let me know down in the comments below. Next is video, and just like every other review on YouTube, it's fantastic. These next couple of clips are shot in 4K 60 FPS, and as you can see for yourself, just look how clear it is. This isn't surprising though, as Apple has always been video king for a while. Now bring that video to low light and things are still pretty good. In this clip, there was almost no light minus the ambient blue lighting, but I could still see what was going on. Give it some more light and things just look fantastic all over again. However, I don't know if you've noticed, but you can also see the flaring that I mentioned earlier with the light source hitting my lens. Back to that 4K 60 FPS that I mentioned earlier, Apple, what the hell took you so long to create a toggle within the camera app to switch resolutions in FPS? What the hell? No longer do you have to go to the camera settings just to change the resolution in FPS. Finally! I'm assuming this is a feature of the new iPhones though, because I couldn't control any of this on my girlfriend's iPhone XR. Anyway, in a nutshell, the cameras are leaps and bounds better than any of its predecessors even from a year ago. So if you really want to step up your Instagram game, this is the phone for you. If you plan on just going with the regular iPhone 11, you still get all the same things except for the telephoto lens. So you just can't zoom in as much and have as clear of an image. Water resistance has been fine as well. Apple one-upped pretty much every other manufacturer when they announced their 4 meters up to 30 minutes IP68 rating, but I still wouldn't go around swimming with this phone unless you have a waterproof case because accidents do happen and water damage isn't covered under a manufacturer's warranty. The phone works fine after being used in heavy rain, however, and I've had no issues pertaining to water resistance still. One thing I do want to mention though, if you do end up getting water in this phone and you do have a case, make sure you take it out of the case and wipe the stainless steel. Because with my iPhone 10, I didn't do that and there was dry spots, and no matter how much metal polisher I used, it just wouldn't come out and just looked ugly. So it could really hurt the value if you end up trying to sell the phone in the future. Now, we didn't forget about iOS 13. Let's start with those bugs. iOS 13 was plagued with issues when it was released. Camera app loading slowly, messages randomly not displaying any messages, and a crap ton of crashes. Apple has been cranking out updates every 2 days until it was stable enough, and now it seems like updates are a weekly or bi-weekly thing. There have been very minor issues here and there, but most of the major issues that came with the initial release of iOS 13 have been fixed with the current build, which is iOS 13.3. So if you've been waiting out for that, now's your chance to enter. Now, I'm not going to review all of iOS 13 because this is an iPhone review, not an iOS review, but I do want to talk about some noteworthy things. Things which may not be specific to the iPhone 11 Pros, but can better your experience with them. Starting with the popular dark mode. Dark mode on these OLED displays look amazing, and it'll actually help with the overall battery life since those pixels don't have to turn on in those completely dark areas. Storage on the iPhone still starts at 64 gigabytes for the base model, but that isn't an issue, so I'm not sure why everyone is still complaining. It seems like everyone forgot that iOS 13 brings smaller app sizes and smaller update sizes. How much smaller? 50% smaller app sizes and 60% smaller updates. That's huge! So basically an iPhone running iOS 12, which has 128 gigabytes, is equivalent to an iOS 13 device with 64 gigabytes, as long as we're not counting pictures. So if you're still complaining about 64 gigabytes, just don't. There's no reason to be complaining. And like I mentioned earlier, because these don't have 3D touch, these new iPhones rely solely on haptic touch, which again works just as fine as 3D touch, just with a minor delay. So if you were worried about how haptic touch worked, don't. It works perfectly fine. So to wrap it up, is the iPhone 11 Pro series worth upgrading to if you have an iPhone 8, 10, or even a XS? Even though we're just 9 months away from the iPhone 12 or whatever they're gonna call it. Well, I definitely think so. The screens are better, the cameras are leaps and bounds better, the speakers sound awesome, and the battery life is just stupid good. The battery life alone was the only reason I wanted to upgrade, and everything else was just a bonus to me. Bonuses that I now realize after using them were awesome additions that I should have cared about even if the battery wasn't as much of an increase as it was. And with Apple giving us all this now, I feel like there isn't much they could do to distinguish the iPhone 11s to the 2020 iPhones. The only thing they could really do at this point is give us a new design, a higher refresh rate display, or just a notchless phone, which I doubt they're gonna do next year anyways. So that's it, guys. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up. Maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the future videos. If you hated this video, well, the dislike button works too. Other than that, I hope you guys learned something and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.